Hello and welcome, or welcome back, as the case may be, to the Atlantean Archive. Today, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to take you back in time to the craziest, most outlandish thing that I ever did for love of a story. And I want you to tell me your stories as well. I know I'm not the only weirdo out there. I mean, this is a channel that caters to people who like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, okay? So we're a bunch of weirdos. We've got some weird stories. Tell me your stories in the comments. Now, in line with that, back in the day, if you were into that stuff, people were looking at you kind of askance, especially adults. They would look at kids who were into that and think, this is not going to turn out well. This child is something is already wrong. They would look at you sort of like you were going to possibly turn into one of the things in the stories that you like to read. And sometimes they thought it was best to intervene in your life, take away your books, get you back into the real world for your own good. You know how that works. Today, things are a lot different, but back then that was more the case, especially if you were a boy. I mean, girls could get by with being bookworms. Boys, on the other hand, were expected to be bouncing off the walls at all times. So if you were a guy and you were reading constantly, you were into your books, that was another level of something wrong with you that certain adults thought that they needed to correct before it was too late. I don't know what they really thought they were going to do. I mean, flip a switch on you or something and suddenly you're going to, resume normal mode or whatever, revert to factory settings from whoever messed you up. I don't know what the deal was, but a lot of them seem to have that idea. Anyway, getting into that, I especially, back in the day, and I knew a lot of kids who were, I was fans of talking animal stories, anthropomorphic animals in situations that are relatable to the human world. And we look at that sort of thing nowadays and we kind of smile at it and we think that's quaint and cute and all that. But I think those were really valuable books, valuable stories. For many of us, they really interested us and drew us into reading, kind of like the Harry Potter books created an explosion of interest in reading for many kids years ago. They really drew us in. Stories like that drew us in. And more than that, they sometimes were our first introductions to relationship issues, to world events, to thoughtful type of literature. Believe it or not, many of these stories, because they are driven by talking animals, people tend to dismiss them. But a lot of those stories were very clever. A lot of them engaged in a great deal of commentary. A lot of them were morality tales. They taught good lessons. And again, they served as introductions to the world of relationships, to even tragedy. Many of these stories were pretty dark when you get right down to it. They were not just simple little flip kids stories. Many of them had some pretty dark elements in them. So we got introduced to a lot of those things through these kinds of stories, and I absolutely love that sort of stuff. Many of you will remember books like Bunnicula, A Rabbit Tale of Mystery by Deborah and James Howe. I have that somewhere. I don't know exactly where it is at the moment, or I brought it up. A couple others. I have many of my old childhood books that I loved so much, still have them. The Cricket in Times Square by George Selden. Some of you will remember that one. Also, its sequel was very popular, Tucker's Countryside. These are my original copies from the early 1980s. Other books as well that I could bring up here, but those are just some examples of books that I particularly loved and read to just ad nauseum. Anyhow, those were cornerstones in what I was reading back then, along with other stuff like H.G. Wells and all of that. I loved all of it. And I came across a story by an author I had never heard of before, Ben Berman, a Southern author, in a book that we were given as a reading assignment. Actually, this book was kind of a compendium of poetry, short stories, one novella, which was the story I'm going to tell you about, and various stories about people and things, legends, all that kind of stuff. It was a great collection of stories. And they handed this to us. And they said, pick something out of here, something fairly lengthy, and do a book report on it. So I chose a story called High Treason at Catfish Bend by Ben Berman, and absolutely fell in love with this story. This is your classic animal character-driven story that has a lot of lessons in it, as well as a very creative style and an engaging writing style. It's just a great story. I recommend it even now for younger readers. And for older people who want to get into that kind of stuff too, especially if you love the retro stuff, you may find that a fun read to go back and look at. I fell in love with that story, and I kind of wonder, Ben Berman was writing in the 1950s, and I sort of wonder if maybe he wasn't inspired partially by the last book I reviewed on this channel, which was The Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, because it's that sort of story. In the story, you've got a group of animals living in a southern swamp area, and they hear tales of this paradise. It's actually called Paradise Valley out in California. And all the animals are going out there. There's all the food you can ever eat, and there's a permanent truce out there, so all the animals are not killing and eating one another. You can live in peace and have plenty and just luxuriate all the days of your life. Paradise Valley. So the animals take a vote in this community, and they decide they're going to go out there, despite the misgivings of some of them, of course, who are ultimately right, as always. And they go out there and they find themselves drawn into a trap. Just like in The Gods of Mars, they find out that this place that has been touted as a paradise was done so in order to lure others to their doom. There's these other animals that are bringing these innocent, unsuspecting creatures into Paradise Valley, where they intend to kill and eat them. So it makes hunting and gathering a little bit easier for them. So that's the gist of the book. And then these creatures, of course, have to work on escaping once they find out the truth. So I don't know. Maybe Gods of Mars inspired that, maybe not. Maybe Ben Berman just came up with a similar idea. But it was a great story. And at the time, I hadn't read Burroughs or anything like that. Really loved it. This was the kind of thing that the Twilight Zone engaged in, and that was another benefit of some of these animal stories, is they presented situations and characters to kids in a way that wouldn't trigger them. When you read human stories, and it's true on every level today, including with adults, people get so easily triggered. You have a cast of characters in a particular story, and you've got so many people nowadays who are wanting to count heads. How many of this kind of people are represented, or that kind? How are they represented? Do I agree with how this is done? Whatever. With animal stories, a lot of that goes away. You don't have groups of human beings and human institutions and human religions or human political parties where you can go by and easily stamp everybody on the head with whatever label happens to be convenient. The animals take that away. You can consider more what's going on in the story, what's going on with characters, what lessons are being taught. And that was a major benefit of this story in particular. Again, Rod Serling did that with the Twilight Zone all the time. He would take things that would trigger people and they wouldn't listen to otherwise, that would totally shut them down. They wouldn't think about it. And he would place them in fantastic settings just to take away all those triggering influences and let people think about things in a brand new way. So, absolutely fell in love with this particular story. Now, there was a problem. I was about to leave that school in a few months, and there were no Ben Berman books in the library at the school. I went to the Fairfax County Public Library where I lived, and they didn't have any Ben Berman books either. None at all. I asked them to check through interlibrary loan, or somebody got them to check for me, because I don't know if I even knew what that was necessarily. That might have just been the first time I learned about that as a kid. Interlibrary loan for you younger people would be something like advanced Google search nowadays. Libraries had this interconnectivity, and they would check and see if they could get books from other libraries, things that they didn't carry, and bring them in. And I think they came back and told me, if I remember right, this is a really dim memory, I remember something about California, and they couldn't bring that in here without it costing a bunch of money, and we would have to put it up, and we didn't want to do that. So anyway, I'm just out of luck. None of the bookstores in our area carried Ben Berman. Nobody seemed to have heard of the Catfish Ben books, even though the write-up in the book that I read it in said that they were very popular. But anyhow, so this is kind of a case of, rock, meet, hard place. I really can't do anything at this point. I finally went back to the school and I asked them if they would be willing to sell me the book. I had some allowance money. I figured I could buy the book from them. And their reaction was more or less, "We do not sell reference books to children. All right, they're in short supply. They cost a great deal, and we do not sell them to students." So at this point, I'm not knowing what to do. And I do not want to be without this story. I loved it that much. So this would be something that would be hard for kids today to relate to. But you Gen Xers out there will get it. You younger boomers, you older millennials, you may get this as well. I went out, for lack of any other solution, I bought myself a brand new shiny notebook. This notebook right here, I still have the exact one. Bought this notebook, bought myself a pack of brand new pens. And then for an hour or two, almost every night, for the next 2 months, I proceeded to copy that story down in my best handwriting, word for flippin' word. This is 60 pages of 12, 13-year-old scrawl here and copied it down. Absolutely. I thought maybe I'd get tired. I actually worried, am I going to get tired of doing this? I didn't. I was on a mission at this point. I was going to stick it to the man, basically. This was sticking it to the man, old school Gen X style. And you can imagine the feeling that came over me the day that I finally reached this page and I wrote these words. The end. I had done it. I had stuck it to the man. I had stuck it to the school administrators who would not sell me the book. I had stuck it to the library lady, the stuffy library lady, who was probably pretty nice when she hadn't had to been at work all day dealing with crappy junior high school students. I stuck it to all of them. I won a massive victory. Yes, it was a victory in a war that no one else on earth knew was going on, but it was my victory, and I celebrated big time. So, you can imagine that I took this down and read this over and over again over the years? Well, you would be wrong. I put it on a shelf. I think I read it once. And since then, I had been able to search on these books are still not easy to find, folks. Even in the internet era, they're still not easy to find. But I did score a couple of them eventually, a couple of the Catfish Bend books. And I also managed to acquire a copy of that textbook that they would not sell me. And this, well worth it. This was published by Harcourt Brace Yovanovitch in 1979. And again, it's typical of readers from back in the day. Many of you will recognize this type of thing, just the sorts of stories that they would tell, character profiles, famous people, legends, all that sort of thing. And the story High Treason at Catfish Bend is the last story in the book, fully illustrated, again, 82 pages long. And it was worth it to me as a kid to get this. As a matter of fact, when I finished the story, I actually thought about going through and trying to copy the illustrations. I could actually draw pretty well in those days, and just fell out of practice. Probably still could if I got back into it. But I only had 2 more weeks before the end of school, having to turn the book back in, whatever. And, for some reason, even when I wasn't reading this book, I always like to look at the cover. Many of you who've commented on some of my past videos, you've said book covers are just magic. And that was the case with this one, too. It seems pretty plain, but I just always wanted to know, what's going on in this ship. Turns out it's a Coast Guard vessel. It's an old-fashioned style Coast Guard vessel. But I always wanted to know what was going on here. And, of course, there were so many fantastic stories in the book that took you to other worlds, other places, much more interesting usually than what was going on in class. But that is my story. That is my crazy book lover story. How a geeky, story crazy, stubborn as heck Gen X kid stuck it to the man back in the day. Now, tell me your stories. I know I'm not the only one. I can't be the only one. I hope I'm not the only one. Tell me your crazy stories. I mean, what did you go out and do? Did you pay $200 for an old mass market paperback novelization that's probably available for 99 cents in Kindle today? What did you do back then? What have you done since then? What is your crazy book story? How many copies of your favorite book do you have? There are some books I've got 5 copies of, paperback, hardback, different kinds of printings, one that means something to me, one I got for a birthday present, all that kind of stuff. Tell me your crazy book stories below. This is mine. It's something I will always remember fondly. I'm going to have to go back and read this thing now just for the fun of it. In fact, speaking of fun, when I got this notebook out again, I happened to be glancing through to see what else I put in there. And I came across a very interesting little set of profiles I wrote after I graduated from 8th grade and left that school. I wrote profiles on all of the people in my class. Will not share those with you. They're rather immature and in some cases just not kind. But fun to read about and laugh about now in my own little world. These will be burned upon my death. Anyhow, tell me your crazy book stories. Thank you for watching. Please give the video a like if you did like it, if you want to just sympathize with me. And consider sharing the content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't and you are as bizarre as I am. And until next time, God bless.